Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, August 27th, 2024. Time for another show, and I can hardly believe it. What? Okay. Yeah, I guess we better get some material together. It's Tuesday. We are expecting our usual visit from Joan McCarter later in the show. And now that the convention is over, but Congress has not yet come back into session and won't for another week. Plus, I guess, not yet time for stories about government shutdowns looming. It's not September just yet. And of course, it's an election year. And this is the year that occasionally, sometimes, some portion of the Republican conference in the House, even where they're craziest, get jittery about government shutdowns. I think some of them have come to understand over the decades that they've been doing this, that this is the year when you don't want to do it because people mostly don't want to see it every year, and they certainly don't really want to feel it going into an election. But MAGA being what it is, they of course still believe that America will say, yeah, we don't need a government. I'm glad it's shutting down. Good. Fantastic. I haven't noticed the other times that it's shut down and nothing good has happened, but whatever. And I'm totally into it. But, I don't know. The number of, I guess the kind of Republican that would be reported in the New York Times as being moderate because they don't openly advocate for shutting down the government in an election year, even though there's nothing particularly moderate about that. I mean, a moderate might also hold that stance, but you know the story. If you're not a complete wacko like, Matt Gaetz, a big mouth and a loudmouth and a showboat, then you're moderate. Even though you also want to, ban abortion nationally and fire on migrants at the border and who knows what else, roll coal in your spare time. Anyway, so that's happening, and we'll keep an eye on it because, I'm curious to see what the strategy is heading into the election from the nominal leadership of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell, who I guess is alive, and the other guy whose name we all forget because all the excitement has been elsewhere. Only when Congress is in session do people remember who the Speaker of the House is, Mike Johnson. And remember that guy? So we'll see what kind of leadership he retains in the House. And then, of course, I think they're all beginning to realize that the possibility of losing control of the House and maybe not being able to wrest away, I guess we could say, the Senate from Democrats becoming a growing possibility with excitement post-convention. And even more to the point, I think probably something I should remind everybody of, excitement or at least donations pouring in down ballot. There's an awful lot of money has rolled into the Harris-Walz campaign, and my hope is that they will make good use of it and share it. But the more direct way to boost the rest of the ballot, of course, is to donate directly down ballot. And there's a lot of good programs out there and a lot of great social media personalities with whom you are familiar. Brain Rap, Charles Gaba, and of course, also LOL GOP. I'm sure that you follow one of the two of them. And there are many others as well. In Twitter days, Bobby Big Wheel, and now I guess he's over at Blue Sky as well. But all of them have in the past or are currently, I don't know if every one of them is running something this year, but probably because it's been pretty successful. You should absolutely think about what you could set aside. Perhaps if you're not a big donor, something that you were considering making a token donation. Oh, what gets considered a token donation these days? $100. Come on, that's a big donation. But, in the era of mega donors, you feel like, maybe I can't make that kind of impact, but I want to be part of it. I see the fantastic fundraising numbers for the Harris-Walz campaign. I kind of want to be part of that excitement. Yes, good, and you should. And they would tell you if they could speak with you, send that money down ballot. It might get there eventually, through sharing programs with the DNC, etc., but it's going to take them a while just to process that money. So a lot of people have put together good programs targeting the various states. If it's happening in your state, fantastic. Nothing at the moment really way down ballot for our state. And here in Virginia, our Commonwealth, thank you very much, apparently, the legislative races are in off years, but congressional races and a Senate race happening as well. So we want to make sure that they are all well funded and taken care of. But battleground states where it's really pretty likely that Democrats can and will do very well, but a reminder of how close it was the first time and how close it could be this time as well. As a matter of fact, I think just before coming on air, I think I did see LOL GOP advertising what's going on over in Michigan, which is where he is, and pointing out that while Michigan Democrats currently have the trifecta, that could have easily gone the other way. Let me just click on it and see if I can't follow backwards a little bit and see if I can't see that post. Because I think the story was that while they're holding on to the trifecta at the moment, something in the neighborhood of 300 or so votes had they gone the other way. 330 voters had gone the other way had they done this in 2022. This Blue Sky Post claims Michigan would have had no trifecta, and all the things that go along with it. No free lunches in schools for the kids, no codification of Roe, no green energy leaps. These are the sorts of things that we need to fight to preserve in the states that have got them, and build in states that don't. And you can see, I'm sure approaching that election, I don't know how much speculation there was about being able to, A, grab a Democratic trifecta, and B, use it so aggressively, since the conventional wisdom is always, well, now you tack to the center because you have a tenuous hold in it. And Republicans, of course, have abandoned that conventional wisdom forever whenever they grab control, even when they don't have a trifecta. And I guess, in places like Michigan, and other states as well, and I wish I had them all at my fingertips to thank them all for the work that they've been doing, but you probably know and you can remind me of them. But Michigan has been a great example. You get a hold of the trifecta, no matter how close a call it was, and you do something with it, and that inspires more support and voting for Democratic majorities in the future. They've made a change. They've done something. This is good. And people come out, but you can see 330 votes. Well, that's easy to sway the other way, but not in the face of this kind of enthusiasm for the Democratic team and the surge in, yes, exactly. The surge in enthusiasm, the surge in voluntarism, the surge in donations, etc. But, we do ourselves a big favor by injecting that money downstream and skipping the 2 or 3 steps wherein higher ups handle the thing, possibly take a cut. That's okay too. But, moving the money and identifying where they're going to put it, well, we appreciate their analysis. A lot of this analysis has already been done, and we know where we have to preserve these things. And it's extremely important. I'll just say, I don't know. I'm not from Michigan or anything, but I'll just say it's extremely important in my view, at the very least, that we do preserve not only that trifecta, but that after the prominent speaking role at the convention for the governor and all of our discussion about how great it's been, it would be a real setback if Republicans were able to point to this sort of aggressive legislating with the trifecta and say that they defeated it at the ballot box. That would be enormously energizing for them and a huge setback. And it will make people revert to the conventional wisdom. And next time that Michigan or any other state manages to gain a trifecta narrowly, or even with a vast majority, in all likelihood, they would point to a loss of that trifecta here in 2024 and say, see, that's what happens when you go out on a limb and try to legislate aggressively with the majorities you've been handed. And no, that's not the message we want them to have. Circumstances are such that, look, things were close and all, and maybe we lost the trifecta because it was just close to begin with. Or maybe we can fight in a way that holds on to it and say, see, the lesson truly is go out and fight, and that makes a difference, and that energizes people, and that moves donations, and you can hold on to that majority. All right, so I don't know. That was on my mind this morning. I guess also on my mind this morning, and I might as well catch you up with it, since Greg Dworkin doesn't make a Tuesday appearance every week, only in convention week, or I don't know, when something spectacular happens. So we can catch up on a couple other things that have been out there that we may have given scant attention to or no attention to, but which are beginning to crop up, and we should acknowledge that they have happened so that you're aware of them. So if someone cracks a joke about this in your presence, you know what the hell's going on. I assume you've heard at this point that, well, you've definitely heard that RFK Jr. is a weirdo in his own right. That was always the case. And I think we mentioned the other day, yeah, so he's come out and I guess he's dropping his presidential bid, but, who cares, and is endorsing Donald Trump, which also kind of surprising-ish, sort of, because he's a Kennedy and he comes from a Democratic family or whatever, but he's a weirdo, and he's a gadfly and an annoyance, and he wants to troll somebody, and I'm not certain why, and I guess the time has come and gone for him to, I would have hoped that he would have spent some time in therapy as a younger man. There's a lot of family trauma there, but I guess it either was ineffective or it just, I don't know, it's been years since he did it. So now he's sort of lost his mind and he's out doing attention-seeking behavior. And, okay, it won't matter very much, I don't think, for the election. The oddity of it, I guess, is that Trump, well, one, welcomes him with open arms because Trump is dumb and he just thinks anybody that expresses, admiration for him is worthy of his attention. He loves that. Even when his campaign is drowning in accusations of being weird, and then they embrace the endorsement of the weirdest person around. So, it's been a couple of weeks that we've been just hearing all the worst and weirdest RFK Jr. stories. There are many. A theme that happens to be emerging, I guess, is, there's weirdos and there's weirdos. We've already separated that, right? There's good weird, this guy really loves, I don't know, whatever it is, bird watching. Okay, is that weird? I don't know. Or is, an independent artist and makes some really weird, mind-bending art. That kind of weird. The good weird. Like when we say things like keep Austin weird. I'm sure Republicans in Texas are pointing that. I thought you liked weird. Keep Austin weird. There's good weird, and then there's, like we said, pervert weird, bad weird, even not pervert, just bad weird. Like there's the pervert kind. And I like to burn ants with a magnifying glass weird. That is bad. We don't want that. And it looks like Kennedy is kind of emerging as one of those types of weird. He's also a pervert weird, but as it turns out, he's also I do weird things with animal carcasses weird. So we heard, I don't know, maybe a week or two ago that, the stories are out there, and you probably already heard them about what the background is about how this came to be known. But he's blurted something out, if I remember correctly, to Roseanne Barr. I don't know. Not really worth figuring out what the angle is on that, but that he blurted out to Roseanne Barr at some point that he was responsible for an incident in New York City about which I remember nothing. I wasn't living I've never lived in New York City. But where a dead bear, a bear cub, I guess, the carcass was discovered in Central Park. Not because there are bears in Central Park, but because something weird happened. But I guess the idea was supposed to be, he found this bear dead, roadkill somewhere, and he picked it up and he put it in his car, which, all right, right there, you're off the charts weird. No, roadkill, leave it. Call the roads department, something, animal control. I don't know. But not pick it up and put it in your car. Now, it turns out that he picked it up and put it in his car. Well, he ended up pulling this prank with it. I guess I have to divert this way. And planting it in Central Park. I guess in the bike lanes on the paths in Central Park, which I guess were controversial to some people, but not normal people, because go for a bike ride in Central Park, normal. You would think that would appeal to somebody like RFK Jr., but no, angry because I don't know what. I think maybe pedestrians were having accidents with bikers. And I'm sure there were some people. It's New York City. There's going to be somebody who's like, biking in Central Park, how dare you? It's a pedestrian thoroughfare, whatever. Well, okay, they needed to work this out. So the idea, though, was that they were going to plant this dead bear there and say, a bear is living in Central Park because of how beautiful and natural it is. Bear not living there. But you didn't know. He's a Canadian bear. You don't know him. And he wandered down. He's in Central Park, but he was killed, goddammit, by reckless bicyclers. Now, I know likely a bicyclist hitting a bear cub. If somebody dies, it's the bicyclist, and not because of the huge collision, but because the bear tears him apart afterwards. I don't know if you can kill a bear with a bicycle. I guess if you work it out where you just are, the bear's wounded and you're clubbing him over the head with a bicycle, and you're, The Rock or something. Sure. Maybe. I don't know. But generally speaking, bear-human fights go the bear way. This was the point, was it was a weird thing, and they discover the bear, and I guess somebody goes in for the thing like, oh yeah, he was hit by a bicycle. Anyway, I don't know. Apparently, I don't know whether anybody believed it, but the big mystery was really, honestly, how did the bear get here? Well, years later, it now turns out, okay, RFK Jr. cops to this, and I may have an article about it somewhere, and I skipped it because it was like, this is a weird thing and it's dumb and we don't need to spend time on it. And you've probably heard about it by now. The other weird part about this one was that I guess in maybe trying to dodge, I guess at some point he told that story, and even Roseanne Barr or whoever he was telling it to at the time said, hey, that's weird. That was dumb and you shouldn't have done that, and it was never going to work as a prank anyway, and what are you doing picking up dead bears, and this is weird, explain yourself to me. And I feel like he was then shifting his story somewhat and saying, well, I originally picked up the bear to eat it. Okay, that's not a good save. You're in worse shape right now. That's awful. It's a terrible thing to do and say. And nobody does that. Again, really, eating roadkill. I mean, it's a thing, and it has happened in the past. And sometimes if it's, I don't know, if a deer is hit, I guess if a bear is hit, if you eat bear meat, and who knows? People who are into game hunting, if a deer is hit in a certain way and they see it hit, and it's, they understand how long the bear or deer has been dead, and they say, there's a lot of good meat going to waste. Maybe we'll get rid of the part that's mangled or whatever, but it makes a little bit more sense. Bear meat, not widely consumed, but, hey, he's RFK Jr., so therefore, I don't know what. So he takes the carcass home, and he's like, I'll put it in my freezer, and I'll eat the bear later. No, you won't. That's crazy. Shut up. You're an idiot. And then his excuse is, well, okay, so you got the bear, and then you're like, all right, bear meat. I mean, if that's dumb and impossible, it's not impossible, but it's very highly unlikely. And he says, all right, I'll eat the bear. And I'll take it home and I'll put it in the freezer. So, he decides to go and do that, except then his story is, oh, I forgot though that I have this very important dinner engagement. And he names the restaurant. He's like going to a fancy steakhouse restaurant for dinner, which, that's the most believable part of a Kennedy's day. I guess, right? So he says, but not only is he going to dinner, but after that, he's flying somewhere else. He's catching a flight to someplace else, which is, okay, like if you're going away on vacation, right? Yeah, you're probably the kind of person that, on the weekend, you're in the supermarket, you're getting ready, you're going on vacation, you're leaving Friday, and you say, all right, well, I need all my regular staples, but I'll get a half a dozen eggs and half a gallon of milk because we're going away soon and it's just going to sit there and go bad or whatever. And I'll just, we'll use this to get through the week, but, right? So you're already thinking about cutting back on these things. And do you go like, well, free bear. So, I'll just stock the freezer with a free bear. And by the way, who has a freezer big enough for a bear? A Kennedy, I guess. An unbutchered bear is just going to go in the freezer. My freezer, I got a pack of frozen whatever. Trader Joe's frozen empanadas. I don't know if they make them or not, but they should. Anyway, barely have room for that. I got the kids' ice cream in there and, ice cube tray and a couple of frozen packages of meat. Bear, no way. Not the big freezer. I even have a second freezer in the garage, as many people do. I'm sure he does too, but still not bear size. There's a certain class of people, I guess, who have man-sized safes, the Cheneys, and bear-sized freezers, and I guess that's the Kennedys, and that's the reason they need a compound in Hyannisport. One of the big buildings on the compound is it's a freezer, a villa-sized freezer. You never know. I'm in Africa, dead elephant, right? Take it with me. I'm going to eat the elephant later. Giraffe, delicious. Gnu, what have you. So his claim is he's going to freeze, I guess, and eat the bear. Then he remembers, oh, I don't eat bear. I eat steak. I'm going to a fancy restaurant for dinner with my fancy family, friends, somebody, are crazy people who eat roadkill, whatever. And then I'm flying to somewhere, equally fancy. So I won't freeze the bear and eat it later. I'll never have time to eat this bear. I know I'll prank bicyclists in Central Park with the dead bear. None of this is working, right? But although it does explain, it gives some credibility to the dumb story that by most accounts he made up, the story of his parasitic brain worm. Remember, that he told that story during a divorce proceeding, in order to come up with a reason why he wasn't being reasonable or paying, alimony to his ex-wife or what have you. And nobody's really sure whether or not that was true or not. It's an awfully dumb thing to admit. But if you're spending a lot of time handling dead animal carcasses, maybe you do have a parasitic brainworm. That is possible, especially if you're eating the roadkill. Well, anyway, that's all just to say that apparently it's habit with him. I have another story that I heard it yesterday. I didn't mention it, but it's out there and circulating, and my brother Mark sent it to me this morning. So now I have to mention that RFK Jr. is now, I don't know, is he embroiled in a controversy? Does it even reach the level of controversy with him? He has, I don't know, admitted to a story has been told about him by his daughter that he, at one point, while at the fancy Hyannisport Kennedy compound, which is such a troublesome compound, so many bad things these days associated with the compound, very little positive coming out of the compound. Time to get rid of the compound. Time to get rid of the Kennedys, really. I did see somebody on one of the social media sites circulating someone else's comment from, I think so, probably from the bad place, and then circulated on one of the good places, that someone was saying, as a person from Massachusetts, it's just time to divest ourselves of the Kennedys. It's just not working anymore. I'm sure there are still a few of them in positive public service somewhere, but it's definitely time to give up on a Kennedy person, one, will be normal, and two, is always a good bet politically, because that's clearly not true anymore. So anyway, hanging out in Hyannisport, word comes somehow that there is a dead whale has washed up on shore somewhere, and it happens around there. And most people go and gawk at such a thing, and the local authorities come and ponder how to dispose of such a thing. But not RFK Jr. RFK Jr. comes to monkey with a dead body. So, the report I happen to have at hand is from Rolling Stone, and I should look through to the original and see if, from Charisma, is that the name? Unless it's pronounced like Charisma or something like that. Madurang at Rolling Stone. Environmental group would like some answers about how this thing happened. What happened? Wants answers about RFK Jr. chainsawing a whale's head off. Dead whale, but nonetheless. His daughter said RFK Jr. once sawed off a dead whale's head and hauled it home like the bear, according to a resurfaced 2012 interview. And it's quite unfortunate and disturbing in its details, but apparently he decided he's going to chainsaw the head off. I think somewhere, I don't know if it was this description or not, where I saw that apparently he has a interest in collecting the skulls and skeletons of various animals. So that's supposed to be, I guess, offered up by way of explanation of why you would saw off a whale's head. But at some point, he goes and he does this, and I guess that just speaks to a weird kind of entitlement all by itself. Like, there's a dead body here. It's not a human, but surely there's some procedure, both environmentally and health-wise, for disposing of such a body, and the authorities will take care of it. But Kennedy says, I'm a Kennedy. Nobody will write me a ticket if I want to saw the head off of this thing. Then, though, he realizes, again, he's moving. He's taking off for his place in New York, so he straps the dead whale head to his car roof and drives to New York. Sure. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I don't know. I probably knew that I was going to end up spending that much time on RFK Jr. just because, I don't know, it reinforces the weird timeline. So, that's helpful in that sense. This is a guy that now Trump is, hooray, he's endorsing me. So, I mean, I don't know. Can we make long story short on this thing? It's possible. RFK goes down to the beach and saws the head off of this thing. This apparently, according to a resurfaced 2012 interview in Town and Country magazine, which, what can I tell you? That's a select readership, I guess. I'm not really sure what their interest in the story was. I guess I don't know. This is the kind of a magazine that would interview a Kennedy for the hell of it. Who were they interviewing, by the way? Kick Kennedy. I don't know. Were they interviewing RFK? And then they also decided to talk to Kick, or is it the Kick Kennedy the subject of I clicked through. So again, just to give you an idea of why would they be doing this, the headline is Camelot Continued. Right? Still dining out on Camelot. It's, 60 years already. But Camelot continued. Kick Kennedy's, and they all have nicknames now. Kick Kennedy's private tour of the family compound. Get rid of the family compound. It's only problems for you. RFK's granddaughter, committed environmentalist, budding actress. I'm sure that's great. Kennedy is shaking up the compound with laughter. Good, because Kamala Harris laughter, but this is 2012. Laughter and her own sense of purpose, I'm sure. America's greatest family saga may have just found a fresh new start. Now you tell me, what's Kick Kennedy doing? It's been 10 years since the interview. I'm sure she's a fabulous person, and it's a very cutesy New England preppy nickname, Kick. I don't know what it stands for or is short for. She looks like a very nice person. She's holding a wonderful dog who is probably aged or dead at this point. But there you go. So the Town and Country magazine. You don't live in that town. And when they say country, they mean, a town that you have to drive a long way to. And you can only hope to maybe Verbo or Airbnb a house there once in a while. If you're listening to the show, unless you're listening to the show as a secret billionaire and are not sharing the wealth by subscribing on patreon.com/KagroX, where you could be supporting us for, I don't know, something in the neighborhood of $1,000 a month if you wish to do so. But, you don't live in that town, and when they say country, they don't mean this country they share with you, the United States. They mean, I have a big lawn. That's the country. Well, anyway, am I resentful of the Kennedys? Sure, why not? Enough with these guys already. They think they're eating bears, and they're not. They're wasting bear meat. All right. So while Robert F. Kennedy's bizarre run for office, we're told back in the Rolling Stone thing, has ended following his suspension of his stupid campaign, his growing list of poor life choices has not. I got to edit this as we go on the fly here. RFK Jr., who's made headlines for endorsing Trump, admitted that he was the guy who dumped the body of a bear cub in Central Park a decade ago. There's a link to a story about that also in Rolling Stone. If you think you need more background on that, or you think I made it up, which I may have at this point, embellished it beyond recognition. But anyway, that, and he also, of course, revealed that doctors once found, he says, a dead worm in his brain. Well, he's back in the news cycle thanks to a resurfaced 2012 Town and Country interview with his daughter, or where his daughter, Kick Kennedy, revealed that he had chainsawed a dead whale's head off that he found in Hyannisport, then bungee corded it to the roof of the family minivan and brought it back to Mount Kisco, New York. So, weird thing about people who endorse Republican presidential candidates strapping things to the animal things to the roof of their car and then suffer the downstream consequences of it, right? Mitt Romney put the family dog in a carrier strapped to the roof of the car, and the dog absolutely couldn't, was scared to death and excreted all over the car, and everyone was disgusted by it. And here in this case, this is a quote from Kick, I guess, every time we accelerated on the highway, and that's what people do there, whale juice would pour into the windows of the car, and it was the rankest thing on the planet. I can imagine. Kick told the magazine at the time, we all had plastic bags over our heads. By the way, terrible for driving. Plastic bag over the head. Also living. But plastic bags over our heads. How? Well, I'll tell you how. We all had plastic bags over our heads with mouth holes cut out, and people on the highway were giving us the finger, but that was just normal day-to-day stuff for us. Which, there's your Kennedy clan for you. I don't know what to tell you. We got to end it with these guys. I guess the plastic bags were over their heads because there was whale juice dripping in the windows and getting on them, and they didn't want it in their hair. But they needed mouth holes because otherwise plastic bag over the head while you're driving or doing anything will kill you. And then people probably at that point chainsaw your head off. You're entitled to, right? I forgot. Yeah, that was part of the issue of it was that the sense of entitlement that, the local authorities won't care what I do with this carcass. Besides, I'm a Kennedy, and I will say, yeah, I chainsawed this animal's head off, and A, what's it to you? And B, do you know that my father was once attorney general and senator, and he ran for president? He was assassinated. So come on. There's been enough trauma in my life. And my uncle was president. So come on. I don't know how that still works. But on Monday, it turns out this week, the Center for Biological Diversity Action Fund called on government officials to investigate whether RFK Jr. violated the Marine Mammal Protection Act. He was already dead. I'm sure that'll be his excuse. And the Endangered Species Act. In a letter to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, I know NOAA, Brett Hartle, the national political director of the center, wrote that under both acts it is, quote, illegal to possess any part of an animal, dead or alive, that is protected under either statute. Continued possession of any whale skull represents a significant and ongoing violation of the law. It has to be for dead or alive, too, because you can't just go shooting bald eagles or pretending somebody else shot the bald eagle and then saying, well, bald eagle, I'm going to have it stuffed and put it in my office. No, you can't just make trophies out of endangered species. Quoting Kick's story to Town and Country, Hartle said that while normally an unverified anecdote wouldn't be sufficient evidence as the basis for a probe, RFK Jr. has admitted that he has recklessly and with no regard to legal requirements taken other species of wildlife for his own personal benefit. He added that his apparent transport of the marine mammal's skull across state lines from Massachusetts to New York also represented a felony violation of the Lacey Act. I'm learning a lot here. Lacey Act, one of the earliest wildlife conservation laws enacted by the United States in 1900. So, I don't know. The whole thing is a bit of a mystery in the sense that, well, why do you keep skulls of animals? Why do you feel entitled to do this? Why would you say, I'm scheduled to go back to Mount Kisco today, but there's a whale head here. I'm going to take it and bungee cord it to the roof of your car. I can't, you're a Kennedy. You can't pay for somebody local to pack it in ice and freeze it until you get back. Why not go back to Mount Kisco and then take the family jet and go back to Hyannisport and go preserve the skull later on? But he's on a tight schedule. Apparently he loses control of what is going on in his life, and he's constantly, can't eat the bear, don't have time, put the bear in Central Park, I gotta go to the airport. By the way, how does he go to dinner in Manhattan, I guess, presumably, and then dump the body and then make it to the airport? I don't know how much time he's got to do any of that. It all sounds like so much BS to me, but if it is, then he's just stupid and crazy. And also, got kind of a weird dead animal thing. So, okay, more weird for the Trump campaign to deal with. If you can't get rid of the Kennedy clan at this point, just ignore them. Or tell stories like this so that people start to think we should ignore them. All right. Another bit of news for you. We mentioned the other day as we were watching the convention on TV, that people were joking at the time as we were trying to figure out who is the special surprise secret guest that's bigger than Oprah. And we were all disappointed to find out that there wasn't anything that, seemed to fit that category. But hey, we watched the convention anyway, so isn't it a big success? And the joke was, well, actually this giant gathering, packed stadium, etc., not much masking going on, unfortunately. The surprise guest is probably COVID. You just don't know it yet. Well, as it turns out, that is the case, or at least a major news organization is willing to run with that headline. NBC News writes, the Democratic Convention's surprise guest, COVID. Positive COVID tests are rolling in. Results are rolling in including among Kamala Harris's staff after last week's Democratic National Convention in Chicago. So, okay, right? And I know we're all sort of over the shock and dismay at people catching COVID, but the timing's bad, right? What's the job? We decided the job coming out of the convention is sustain this level of excitement and enthusiasm and spread it across the country. They're going to need to do some aggressive campaign work in order to make that happen. But the people who are chiefly charged with finding ways to do that and executing ways to do that are now largely sick with COVID. And the protocols, of course, are stay home, isolate. And I'm sure they have a deep bench of talent for staffing Kamala Harris and arranging these things. But everybody will now be somewhat hobbled by COVID, and that wasn't super smart. I don't know how much you could do to avoid it. She had to be staffed, and those staffers all had to be at the convention for sure. But I guess in hindsight, a wise thing to do, maybe they did it, maybe we'll find out that they did it, would be to like double up on staffing and say, okay, this group of you must be at the convention. I need you. This other group of you, stay away from the convention. Wear your masks. I'm going to need you to step in as a backup staff once this staff all gets COVID at the same time. But I doubt very much that anybody was able to plan and execute that in advance. NBC News' Natasha Korecki and Elise Perlmutter Gumbiner, hyphenated, Perlmutter Gumbiner are responsible for this reporting. They came hoping for Beyonce. They left with COVID. Fresh off of a jam-packed week of Democratic National Convention events, reports of attendees testing positive for COVID are rolling in. How could they not? We just saw it happen with the Olympics. And that's much more dispersed and outdoors. They include where'd the 5 come from? Oh, I'm just reading Vice President. They include members of Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign staff. It looks like 5, but it's because of the big V, maybe. There's no F, though. Anyway, they're now contending with sickness from COVID, according to 2 sources close to the campaign with knowledge of the cases. There is at least some concern the developments could affect staffing at events this week, they added. One of the sources said that so far the AIDS symptoms they've heard about have been mild, and a third person close to the campaign said there was no concern about staffing the events. They will get other people. But since the convention wrapped up Thursday, various attendees and reporters have posted photos of positive COVID results. You put 20,000 people in an 18,000 person building, it's bound to happen. True. Said Jamie Sexton, a Chicago political consultant who attended the convention and was involved in multiple related events. Sexton said he knew of people who now have COVID from the convention and has heard of even more anecdotally. You could ask anybody who was planning an event. They know somebody who has COVID, he said. The convention had overflow crowds at the United Center each day, particularly Thursday. Before 8 p.m. that evening, organizers announced the venue would be closed off because it was at capacity. Much buzz that night about a surprise guest taking the stage, making a big splash. Rumors were rampant, etc. But maybe the DNC surprise was the COVID we got along the way. News Nation reporter Kelly Meyer posted on Twitter alongside a photo of a positive COVID test result. In 2020, before a vaccine was available, Democrats canceled their in-person convention because of COVID. We all remember that. Great success with the calamari, though we lost the calamari chef along the way. Not from COVID, although maybe he had COVID as well, but we lost him to turning out to be a Trump guy. Anyway, so there you go. There's a summer wave going on. A new vaccine is hitting the shelves, approved by the FDA some week or 2 ago, and apparently you can start getting appointments now for getting the new updated COVID vaccine. Still awaiting that nasal vaccine that apparently somehow can also block transmission. That'll really be turning the corner on COVID once that is widely administered. So get those masks out if you have put them away. There should be a surplus of them on the market now. I still have mine, and I still try and make sure to take it with me when I'm going to be indoors shopping or running around someplace doing errands. And I'm not perfect with it, but you'll usually find it on me when I'm in the supermarket or, the hardware store or wherever I might be spending my normal male American time like Tim Walz. All right. That reminds me also, good commentary I saw over the weekend. I don't know that I put this one aside either, but dang. Lots of people talking about this, a wave of stories talking about Tim Walz kind of, I think we did mention this possibly yesterday, redefining the masculinity thing, and just that what was redefining it wasn't I'm pretty sure we must have talked about it yesterday. Redefining things in terms of what? In terms of not being a jerk, basically. That, he checked all the boxes in terms of activities. Family man, hunter, veteran, football coach, right? But the big difference in masculinity. Why was he redefining masculinity? Because he wasn't being abusive towards people. I thought that was kind of an important observation. And lots of people sort of building on that observation as well. I don't know. Wanted to make sure that got mentioned because I thought it was a good thought. So speaking of these sorts of people, I guess, who are being aggressive jerks, there are lots of them. We read a little bit yesterday about the godfather of the weird, essentially, to J.D. Vance and others, and maybe we should just continue with that for a few minutes before the top of the hour. The profile of Curtis Yarvin, but actually before I get there, since we were on the RFK Jr. bent for a little while, I would also mention, look at this, I guess it's no longer available via the archives, the internet archives, but it was there the other day. I'll just give you the headline of it because it's not super important as a story, I guess, in terms of adding to reasons why you don't like RFK Jr., but it was a piece in The Atlantic. RFK Jr. was my drug dealer. It's a story in The Atlantic. This is the story of somebody who knew him in college. What college? Harvard, of course. And that, in his younger days, he was well known around campus as a good source for buying the cocaine that everybody needs to get through your typical day at Harvard University, apparently. So there's that story in the background, too. He's not a great guy to latch onto, not a fantastic person that you want on board with your campaign. Can't wait to get his endorsement, et cetera, et cetera. I did see somebody else saying, how will Donald Trump square his position taken multiple times over the course of however long we've been paying attention to the guy, that drug dealers in America, like in other countries, we ought to be executing drug dealers. So he's now, you've just taken the endorsement of a guy that he thinks should be executed. How does he square that? The answer is derpy, derpy, der. He doesn't square anything. F you. I do what I want. There's no laws that apply to me or any of my friends. If they say something nice about me, they get to go on, and I'll even pardon them. If they say something bad about me, then back to execution. So there you go. Fantastic. Now it's all unraveled for you. So how about a few more minutes about Curtis Yarvin and the weirdness he represents? Yesterday, if you weren't listening to the show, go back and listen to the story of Curtis Yarvin and how he wants American democracy toppled, and that he has some prominent Republican fans. That's the, the revision of the poor reading of really the headline on this piece from Vox from 2022. Andrew Prokop profiling Curtis Yarvin, the New Right blogger, he says in his subheader, has been cited by Blake Masters, Weirdo Supreme, and J.D. Vance. Actually, I should have saved that title for him, Weirdo Supreme. What exactly is he advocating? Well, among other things, that we should perhaps scrap American democracy and go to a monarchical model. Whether it's supposed to be hereditary, I don't know. But basically saying, wouldn't things be a lot easier if we just had a dictator? The business model of the CEO, well, he's basically a dictator. He really is not. Couldn't we have that in American democracy? And now what's Curtis Yarvin's corporate experience? He has or had a tech startup. Tech startups not really, I think, best known for their adherence to the successful blue chip stock publicly traded company corporate governance model. They really are very often sort of dictatorships, at least inside the office. They're usually beholden to their venture capitalists who also behave like dictators. So, I mean, they spend most of their time in dictatorships, either kowtowing to the wealthy benefactors that keep them afloat or demanding fealty from the poor saps who have signed on to help them get their startup off the ground in the hopes that they will one day become fabulously wealthy. There was a moment in the early 2000s when tech startups turned numerous of their employees into instant millionaires. That time has come and gone. I think the top brass can get turned into millionaires and billionaires, but the run-of-the-mill workers, usually not. I'm just thinking back to the old days of like America Online, which, I mean, is considered rightly a dinosaur at this point. Why aren't they the dominant force in American technology and online life today? I don't really know, but one of the reasons might have been, now they weren't known for, distributing the wealth too far, but in my area where they were based, America Online famously created a bunch of instant millionaires by paying people in stock options. And then while it was hot, people worked for a while, they made lots of good money, and then they sold their stock or whatever, and they became millionaires and retired in their 30s, and the money is still there. And it did do that. And then people thought, oh, this will happen elsewhere. And then, of course, as the financiers figured out, why am I giving millions and millions of dollars to thousands of people who work here when I could keep it all for myself and be a billionaire? I can compensate these people pretty well, but why give them the opportunity to make millions when I could steal those millions? I don't want to be a millionaire. I want to be a billionaire. And then that model was out the window. Well, anyway, so in the meantime, the people running the startups, the venture capitalists sort of would allow them to be selves to be more hands off and allow the CEO of the startup to call the shots. But the general pattern, I think we all noticed in the .com world and the tech world in general, was that the CEO would ride high for a while, make or bank or get on paper his billions of dollars. But then eventually, if the business was an actual success, a board would force them out. This person's actually crazy. They're an idiot. They don't know how to run a business. They were fine in the startup environment, but now we're beyond that. We got to get a real pro in here. You're out. You get to keep billions of dollars, and we also keep billions of dollars. But, the dictatorial, monarchical model doesn't really work long term, but Curtis Yarvin got a hold of some money this way, so that apparently equals success. So now everybody ought to do things this way, right? Well, wrong. But anyway, his particular trajectory also included lots of posting online as the weirdly named Mencius Moldbug, which online pseudonyms are always weird, and mine is weird too, but his is evocative of a sort of weirdo Dungeons and Dragons / Tolkien type situation. And that just adds another level of weirdness. All right. Well, I'm using up all of our top of the hour time here in explaining the background. Although I do need to note for the record, we have some more time available to us. It turns out, not COVID, thankfully, but Joan lets us know, not a great day for a visit today. So we all wish her well and hope her day turns around. And who knows what's going on, but it's late summer. You need another breather before you head into the busy season. So we totally understand that, and we'll wish you well and hope we get to catch up with you again soon, Joan. Thanks for letting us know. But now we know we can talk more about the weirdo Mencius Moldbug Curtis Yarvin. So we were reading yesterday about the bullet points of how he thought America was broken and could be fixed. There was, of course, the interest in a dictatorship of some sort. That true U.S. power, true power in the U.S. is held by the cathedral, as he put it, elite academic and media institutions that he has almost nothing whatsoever to do with. And not just that the current government sucks, but the democracy sucks. It's a dangerous, malignant form of government, and we need a dictatorship or monarchy instead. Far preferable, right, in his view, would be one leader holding absolute power. Well, we read about that And let's see, did we? Yeah, maybe not. We got to this point and reminder that he's blogging and all this, and now people are reading it and saying, yeah, I'm running for office and I should base my platform on this. Though his blog was pseudonymous, we read yesterday, he had not made a particularly extensive effort to keep his identity secret. And so, it wasn't like a big reveal that he was actually Curtis Yarvin, startup guy. He did, in fact, get himself disinvited from one tech conference in 2015 after protests about his political philosophy, and his appearance at another in 2016 led a lot of the sponsors and speakers to withdraw. He has along the way been, well, maybe slavery wasn't such a bad thing. He has insisted that while the racism was despicable and there's no inherent moral superiority of Europeans, well, what can you do? That's just the way it is, and it wasn't so bad after all, which is not a great way to endear yourself to, normal thinking people. Then there was the influence on J.D. Vance, right? And in explaining to podcast host Jack Murphy why he, Vance, became a Trump supporter after initially being if not a never Trumper, then initially disdaining him. Vance says, I saw and realized something about the American elite, the other people, not me, the Yale guy, and about my role in the American elite, and it took me just a while to figure out. I was red-pilled. That was by way of introducing the fact that it's Yarvin who kind of coined the pilling terminology. People were buying into it for some reason. All right, so when we come back, because we're going to have to take our 1 minute break in just a little bit, how to win absolute power in Washington, right? We, I think, began reading these things when we were going through this piece yesterday. Talk of an American coup may sound bizarre, right? It sounds a lot less bizarre these days, perhaps. But they do happen. And in Yarvin's telling, they even have already happened in the U.S. That is to say, basically when Democrats have won office. It's been a huge coup, although he also mentions Abraham Lincoln as well. His argument, Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Lincoln, and FDR, each so sweepingly expanded presidential power, centralizing authority and establishing new departments, horrors, that they can be said to have founded new regimes. Of course, they did so through acts of Congress, and what can I tell you? But somehow Mencius Moldbug thinks they used magical spells, and so we should too. Weird. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with what we were reading about Curtis Yarvin, and I'm just responding and letting Joan know we've acknowledged her message. I'm just trying to find a spot where we left off. I know we read about Yarvin's theory that dictatorship would be okay with the American people. They would accept it just so long as you campaigned on it openly. I am going to be a dictator, let's say on day one. And if the people approve it, well, then everything is A-okay because they said it was okay, which is an interesting theory. Consent of the governed / monarchy, dictatorship. Dictatorship is okay if everybody says they're okay with it, or if 50% plus one are okay with it, or just to be realistic about it, maybe considerably less than 50%, maybe 45%, but the Electoral College tips it your way. Or maybe the Electoral College doesn't even tip it your way, but as dictator, you forge Electoral College certificates, and so therefore it's A-okay. As long as you produce a trail of paperwork, or maybe don't produce a trail of paperwork, but just take over having said you would. Presumably I assume that Yarvin would at some point say, well, you don't want to fake the votes necessarily. That's not what I'm saying. You should definitely get the consent of the governed, if cornered. Really? For a dictatorship? I don't know. Startup, magic, Dungeons and Dragons, Dark Elf. Okay, fine. Just, I'm sure that it's deeper and better connected than all of that, but just at bottom, it's just still garbage. If you're saying we really ought to vote away all of our inalienable rights. Unalienable in the original, but, I'm an originalist. Okay. So anyway, as he says, campaign on it and win. The would-be dictator should seek a mandate from the people, which is not really what dictatorship is about, but what the hell? I'm going to say it anyway because it sounds intellectual. The idea would not be to frame this as destroying the American system, even though, as it turns out, they're campaigning on destroying the American system, but rather as improving a broken system that so many are frustrated with. Congress is unpopular, courts are unpopular, federal government is unpopular. Why not just promise to govern as a president as you see fit without their interference and see if people like that idea? How would they manifest that? Don't know. But in Yarvin's telling, I guess, a vote, one vote. I don't like black people. I don't like women running things. Is that a vote for dictatorship? That Curtis Yarvin says so, then there you go. You got to how do you discern whether people are okaying a dictatorship or not, or are just afraid of people of color or women running the country? Or I heard that they were going to let lots of Mexicans in, and so therefore now you want a dictatorship? I don't know. You can't read those tea leaves. But Yarvin can because he once had a tech startup. So that guy is super smart. And Mencius. How could you not be smart if your name was Mencius, right? What is Mencius? I don't even know. Nobody knows. I don't know, but it sounds like one of those guys, one of those neckbeard weirdos who's actually super intelligent, even though he's been kind of maybe not a success by conventional measures, but somehow he amassed a bunch of money. Probably, I would guess, tech? As many of us have theorized, as I was reading to you that Jeremy Freiberger was theorizing the other day. Yeah, the D&D guys, they're weird, but they're intelligent underneath it all. How are they using it? I don't know, but they can tell you all about every monster in the monster manual, just as latter-day kids can tell you all about every Pokemon, even if they don't seem to be interested in paying attention in school. But they're smart underneath it all. And, Dungeons and Dragons and Pokemon are both fake, but then again, so's Bitcoin and NFTs, and some people have managed to retire on those. Anyway, where were we with this? You're not that far from a world in which you can have a candidate in 2024 even maybe making that pledge, running as a dictator on day one, for instance. Yarvin told his interviewer back then, I think you could get away with it. That's sort of what people already thought was happening with Trump, he said. And I think he might largely be correct there. To do it for real does not make them much more hysterical. And he laughed. It's actually much more effective. How is it more effective? We don't know. It hasn't been. It's never won. It's never been effective. But Mencius Moldbug says it's effective. And that's a person that sounds like they might be intellectual under all the weirdness. Now, it no longer seems clear that voters would reject such a pitch. Trump's ascendancy already proves that many American voters are no longer so enamored of the niceties about the rule of law and civics class pieties about the greatness of America's separated powers system. Political messaging about threats to democracy has polled poorly last year, 2022 rather, with voters not particularly engaged by it, although I think it's been growing in influence lately. But still, there's a better angle on it, and certainly they're weird and we have joy and we just want normalcy again. Messaging is working, but underneath it all, it is in fact a rejection of this approach. Another piece of advice Yarvin has in this vein is that the would-be dictator should try to prevent blue America from feeling so terrified about the new regime that they take to the streets and make it all fall apart. Instead, ideally, liberals and leftists should be so disillusioned with the status quo that they're ready for something new. He thought things were on a promising trajectory on this front during the early Biden administration, but has griped that the Dobbs decision may have scuttled this by firing up blue America. So, in other words, we need to prevent you from feeling terrified. Instead, we have to make you feel depressed and hopeless so that you just give in to the dictatorship as opposed to being scared of it. But, one, I don't know if you can separate the two, and two, I don't know if you're the guy to do it. Now, then there was the bits and pieces of this that are finding their way into action right now or already. Purging the federal bureaucracy and creating a new one, which, of course, now that we've learned about, well, his version of it was RAGE, remember? And then Blake Masters was super excited about RAGE, retire all government employees, which now has become Schedule F, which has also then become embodied in Project 2025, and yet there's no connection. Don't look behind the curtain, et cetera, et cetera. Talk of firing vast swaths of federal workers is now common on the right. In late 2020, Trump issued that executive order, Schedule F. Biden repealed it. Nothing came of it. Biden revoked it. Trump's regime in exile is brainstorming what could be done with it in the second term. As it's mentioned here, as Axios' Jonathan Swan has reported, and which we now all has taken shape in Project 2025. To Yarvin, even that is a doomed half measure. You should be executing executive power from day one, like as a dictator, in a totally emergency fashion, he told Anton, and Trump, too, believes the same. That's what the dictator on day one thing is about. Some people have defended Trump somehow or tried to clarify or launder his statement to mean that, well, on day one, I'll be a dictator and do all these emergency things, but then on day two, we'll go back to democracy. But some of these things need to be done on an emergency basis, in which case he's adopting Yarvin's framing. Others believe, no, he'll be dictator beginning on day one and forever after, which might not be all that different from what Yarvin actually advocates anyway. So yes, to Yarvin, it would be a doomed half measure if you just Schedule F everybody. You want them to totally cease to exist. You want to defund all agencies, as though that would suddenly mean that Donald Trump would become capable of running the entire bureaucracy himself, or would even put capable people in charge of running the bureaucracy themselves. Yarvin thinks that it'll be people like him and people he's influenced and people who think like him who would be put in to run these agencies, when in fact it's just other octogenarians who are hanging around at Pervalago, which is the lesson we learned when he put them in charge of the Veterans Affairs department. So at any rate, we see what Trump really does with these things. He's a terrible messenger for this a terrible idea. So really two levels of badness in all of this. So I think that's probably about to where we got. And then the next section, I think, was of some great interest, but we were out of time for it yesterday. Ignore the courts. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound like something that is actually finding adherents among the Republican Party? Ignore the courts is the next piece of advice. The rule of law in America is based on shared beliefs and behaviors among many actors throughout the system, but it has no magical power, which is probably what upsets Yarvin. He loves magical power. The courts have no mechanism to actually force a president to abide by their wishes, should he defy their rulings. Yet, with certain notable exceptions, they have had an extraordinary track record, courts, at getting presidents to stay in line. Defying the Supreme Court means ending the rule of law in the U.S., as it has long been understood. Yeah, well, you were all pretty wrong about the importance of the rule of law. Yarvin has suggested just that a new president should simply say he has concluded that Marbury versus Madison, the earlier ruling in which the Supreme Court greatly expanded its own powers, was wrongly decided. Like Roe. And you know how Trump got that message mixed up in his brain. Everybody wanted Roe ended. Everybody wanted it sent back to the states, and I did it. And now we did it. They're angry. Now they no longer want it. Now they never wanted it. You heard some weirdo fringist say that Roe was wrongly decided or badly decided and should be reversed. And then you figured that must also mean, and they don't want any abortions to happen, because that's usually who's arguing this stuff. And you mushed it up together and said everybody wanted Roe ended. Everybody. No, a couple of people thought it was bad. And that's it. Now he can just do the same with Marbury versus Madison. Oh, I heard that was bad too. He's also said the new president should declare a state of emergency and say he would view Supreme Court rulings as merely advisory. Why not? You can do it in Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, you'd have to roll very high, but what the heck? It can be done. If it can be done in D&D, it should be done in American government. That's weird. Would politicians back this? Well, yeah, sure. J.D. Vance. And remember, this is being written in 2022 when he was a candidate. And also remember, by the way, he was a candidate for office for the first time for the Senate in 2022, and he is now on the ticket for vice president in 2024. So he was elected to a 6-year term. He's not yet completed 2 of them, and he's on the ballot to be elevated to vice president. I mean, people move fast. Kamala Harris was only elected to 1 term in the Senate before she was on the ticket, right? But she was also in elective office before that and had been working in electoral politics for some time before that. Had run for president, in fact, and then ended up on the vice presidential ticket. He has just finished running for Senate as a weirdo. But would politicians back this? Well, technically, J.D. Vance is a politician. He's been a politician for 2 years. J.D. Vance, in the podcast mentioned above, said part of his advice for Trump in his 2nd term would involve firing vast swaths of federal employees. And that was the previous section. And now the courts. When the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say, the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. Well, how else should he rule, this new dictator? Co-opt Congress. One reason past presidents have been reluctant to defy the Supreme Court is that there is one body that can keep them in check, supposedly. It's Congress, which can impeach him and actually remove a president from office and ban him from running again. But now congressional majorities have been gradually getting more deferential to their party's presidents. Yet the threat of impeachment and removal hung over much of Trump's decision-making and likely prevented him from going further in several key moments. For instance, he didn't fire special counsel Robert Mueller, and he backed down and left office after January 6th, which Mitch McConnell's allies were leaking that the GOP Senate leader might support, while they were leaking that he might be supportive of impeachment. In an apparent threat to Trump, Congress also frequently cut Trump out of policymaking and ignored his veto threats. So I guess he has work to do on co-opting the rest of Congress. But Yarvin's idea here is that Trump, or insert future would-be autocrat here, should create an app. Yeah. I mean, shouldn't this be a tip? Yeah. How can a president in this system take over the courts and Congress and become a dictator? Well, how about an app? How about an NFT? Yeah. Of course, the tech guy says, create an app. All right, what will the app do? I mean, really, though, that should make you say, no, this guy's an idiot. I don't want to read the rest of this. But okay, let's see what he has to say. Create an app, the Trump app. What a great name for it. That would be awesome. And get his supporters to sign up for it. Isn't that the trick, though, in tech land? Well, what you do is you create a killer app, and then you get people to sign up for it, and then I don't know what happens, and you're a billionaire. What if the app doesn't work? I don't know. I'm a billionaire. Who cares? I'm done. So Trump would then handpick candidates for every congressional and Senate seat. He couldn't do that if he tried. Whose sole purpose would be to fully support him and his agenda. And believe me, he has tried. He wants that very badly, but he can't win those races, and he's bad at picking them. And there's 535 of them, and he can't do 20. And he couldn't win 10 of them. He's notoriously bad at picking candidates. Anyway, every once in a while he picks one, and it's a super red state, and they win, and he says, they only won because of me. Anyway, but he should totally do that, and I don't know what the app has to do with it. And, oh, here we go. We're going to find out. Trump should handpick candidates for every congressional seat whose sole purpose would be to fully support him and his agenda, and use the app to get his voters to vote for them in primaries. That's called telling people who you have endorsed and then hoping that they listen to you, except it hasn't worked so far. But when Mencius Moldbug recommends it, it's going to work because he's a tech guy. And after all, something, he did tech and now he's rich. Or maybe he's rich, or rich people will continue to give him money and listen to him. So that's it. I really don't know what's going on here. Trump has been picking primary favorites and has had some success in open seat contests, but this would be a far more large-scale strategic and systematic effort. No, it wouldn't, because he's not interested in doing things large-scale or systematically. He does them haphazardly. When he feels like it, he's not the vehicle for this. But that's not to say that somebody else couldn't be, i.e., maybe J.D. Vance could do it. Not that he's popular enough to get there, but I mean, just for a moment here, just to pause for a second and think about the political science of it. And again, we need to be, I call for an investigation into what the F is going on Ivy League campuses. This guy is, I guess, Ohio State undergrad political science trained. I don't know what his major was. But Yale Law School just fails, not Yarvin, I'm sorry, J.D. Vance. But J.D. Vance, to have that training and that opportunity and that education available to you and then say, yes, Mencius Moldbug makes sense. The thing you got to do if you want to have a dictatorship, well, clearly it's going to be tough to have a dictatorship, to convince people in this country who love freedom and independence, supposedly, and it's in all our founding documents, and we rejected monarchy explicitly. How can we change their minds on it? Well, what if we elected somebody who said, I'm going to be a dictator, and they won? Well, then still he could be held in check by the courts. What if he ignored the courts? Well, he could still be held in check by Congress. What if he handpicked every single member of Congress? Then they wouldn't impeach him, right? I mean, you don't even need to do that. He incited an insurrection, and they wouldn't impeach him. So it's better off to just bet that the impeachment is off the table. But wouldn't it be great if they would all vote for everything that he said? And then if you don't like dictatorship, we could still point to Congress and say, well, they approved it all. Well, would they approve it all? Well, they would if he handpicked every member. All right. But I mean, how do you get every person in America to vote for his handpicked candidates? I mean, he's been handpicking candidates for a long time and they get crushed. Well, this time he would have an app. Well, I mean, that's a tech bro answer. And this reminds me of something else that's going on in the background on another channel, essentially, where I'm watching on Blue Sky Dave Karpf, political science professor, reading, reviewing, and analyzing Nate Silver's book, where I guess the same thing has happened. Nate Silver made a fortune for himself in this weird niche sector of I love gambling and sports, and somehow I think I can apply this to politics. And then he did once, and it worked nicely. And so then they launched a new business, 538, and venture capital type people and people with money backed it, and then ABC bought it, and I don't know. Anyway, as it turns out, along with a lot of other interesting analysis about what turns out to be Nate Silver's unacknowledged gambling addiction, which is an interesting theme to the review of the book by Karpf here, but also sort of pointing out that essentially, like tech bros and maybe like everybody, it turns out you have a modicum of success or a great deal of success, and then magically when you write your biography or your philosophy of life, it turns out that that thing that you were good at and that you were successful with is in fact the key to life for everyone. Yarvin has some success as a tech bro. I want to have a dictatorship. So does Trump. Why isn't Trump able to make his dictatorship work? Well, he hasn't taken over the entirety of the government yet, but he could. How? With political science, if I had really studied that. But instead, I have had success with tech. So the answer is an app. The app is garbage. What are you talking about? Just like I put AI in it, so it's good. And I've told you that reminds me so much of the early 2000s, back to the early 2000s again, when putting .com on the end of the name of your company or interactive on the end of the name of your company was going to turn it into a gold mine, and in many cases did, even though it defied all logic. I don't know. For the time being, people are throwing money at anything that's a .com. Okay. Well, if you get in and get out at the right time, you look like you're a genius. But then you write a book about yourself and applying your system to life, and it turns out that your philosophy is you're a hot dog vendor in New York City and I'm just not making it. I need to sell, turning yourselves into hotdogs.com doesn't actually, after a certain period of time, guarantee you any success, even if it worked for you. Not that it couldn't. The first guy to be hotdogs.com, if he did it in 2001, maybe he made $1 million. And then, of course, there was September 11th and all the money went away. But anyhow, the point is, I guess that's the case with all biographies. If you read the biography of a famous golf pro, he'll tell you that the key to life has something to do with golf. Golf taught me many things, and it taught me to this, that, and the other thing. But the key to life isn't golf. The key to life is the other things. Anyway, back to Curtis Yarvin and the Trump app. He's simply going to use the app to organize a list. And if people would all just sign up for the app and then vote for who the app recommended, then he would control all of Congress. But the big problem is, step 1, endorse everybody. Step 2, get an app to distribute the news of your endorsements. Step 3, question mark, question mark, question mark. Step 4, profit or take over the United States. That's the problem. Once again. But back to Vox and Alex Prokop's write-up here. The goal would be to create a personalistic majority that nullifies the impeachment and removal threat and that gives the president the numbers to pass whatever legislation he wants. Now, without the app and without the personalistic majority, they have still nullified impeachment and removal threat. Maybe it has something to do with his personality that nullified it, but really it's still party loyalty that's done it. He's launched an insurrection. He violated every law in the books and every trust Americans had placed in him the first time around with the impeachment by trying to wrangle some personal political benefit out of foreign policy. They wouldn't remove him from that. He launched an insurrection and sent a mob to murder one of the highest ranking Republicans there is, the vice president at the time, and that they wouldn't remove him for either, whether on technical grounds or not. So really, they've already gotten there. He's reinventing the wheel on that one. The part he's still striving for is, also there would be unanimous consent for every piece of legislation that he proposes. That seems far-fetched, but there will be an app. I'm shaking my head. No. If you can win majorities in this way, then congratulations. You've turned the U.S. into a parliamentary dictatorship, Yarvin told Chow. Effectively, the U.S.'s Madisonian separation of powers will have been made moot. That sounds like a tremendous accomplishment. I mean, a bad idea, but if you're into it and you can make it happen, that would be a tremendous accomplishment for you. It's just, all he's basically said is, well, if you can win majorities this way, if you can win the presidency, but also every single seat in Congress, or at least, if not veto-proof majorities, and overwhelming majorities where no one wavers, or really even a narrow majority in both houses where no one ever wavers, although in the Senate, you might think you need 60 votes, but of course you can just change the rules, so maybe not. But interestingly, back to the top of the show, if you can hold a trifecta even narrowly and under weird circumstances, but just be super aggressive with it, perhaps you can succeed. But by the way, he's like, well, if you can manage to, win 536 elections all at once, then congratulations, you've turned the U.S. into a parliamentary dictatorship or something else. I don't know. But if you can magically do the thing that's required, the minimum basic requirements to, and then nothing changes afterwards and everybody toes the line. Well, congratulations on a number of things. No one's ever done that. Is there political science behind it to say, can you take the system we currently have and run the table with it? Well, one, probably not. But two, if you did, would you be able to do things? Yes. Is it because Mencius Moldbug or because monarchy or because democracy sucks? No, none of those things. But okay. He goes on to say, I think it could be done by, anyone with a few $1 billion to spare, he continued. This is what pisses me off, he says. Isn't that interesting? That I don't know anyone with like billions of dollars who could do this. Yes, you do, of course. He then paused, which you can read into as you wish. Oh, you know, such is life. Now, okay. It's dumb. It's fantasy land, or maybe frighteningly close to reality, depending on how you view it. But I guess really just to get back to why are we, reading about this guy at all? Not just the fact that he's apparently influential with people who might actually be handed power in this country, but also what the F is this person being featured in any media reporting for? I mean, it's interesting because we've found out that he's influencing people, so we need to know who he is. It's just, why is he influential? Why is it that people who are going to Ivy League schools are listening to this and saying, yes, you have a point here? Oh, no.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue digging through this, although I guess really the point if you're still wondering what's the point of learning about Curtis Yarvin, is, I guess at bottom, my amazement that this isn't like considered F- political science work by the greatest brains of our century, the people that we've entrusted to absorb and carry forward Ivy League educations into our political system, are observing this and saying, this is not only, not garbage, but should be my political philosophy. I think that's disturbing, to say the least, and something I'd like to get to the bottom of. All right, a little bit more then to go. We might as well race through it and get done with it. Centralized police and government powers. Why don't you just go ahead and do that? Well, how? Moving forward in the state of emergency, Yarvin told Anton the new government should then take direct control over all law enforcement authorities, federalize the National Guard, and effectively create a national police force that absorbs local bodies. This amounts to establishing a centralized police state to back the power grab, as autocrats typically do. It's not that, all laws would be out the window, so I guess it's possible once you consolidate a certain amount of power, but I'm just thinking about all the moving parts and all of this. And his answer at all times is, well, if you can just get enough people to vote this way, then you can do that. And it's not clear that you can get enough people to vote that way. But if you have an app, something, and then once you do, I agree that if you were to elect a president who promised to work as a dictator, and elected enough of Congress that would promise to go along with that dictatorship, that you could do these things, but you could, A, never waver from their loyalty. And, maybe it's just dumb to think of Donald Trump as being the person to execute this, if only because he's so famously capricious that I don't know that A, he could hold it together, and B, people that said they would remain loyal to him might have to change course at some point, or might not change course, but yet still find themselves somehow arbitrarily singled out by Trump for some sort of retribution, and then they do waver. And they upset the balance of having to run the table on every single thing every single time. An app isn't going to fix that. Dungeons and Dragons isn't going to fix that. Blogging isn't going to fix that. We live in a pretty extraordinarily complex society, but leave it to, fantasists like Mencius Moldbug to think, well, sweep all that aside. Remember, we're just saying for the sake of argument, assuming that you get your way on all these things, then you could do this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, well, you can't, things don't work like that. But imagine if they could. Remember, you're rejecting the premise here. We're supposed to be having a discussion about what I think could happen. Fine, go ahead. It's just that, again, if you get an Ivy League education, you should be able to say, no, this is not going to work for multiple reasons, and it wouldn't be a good idea even if it did work. One of the things that this further assumes is that everybody knuckles under to the dictatorship later, which is historically the case for the first couple of years or even decades of dictatorship. But most dictatorships end in terrible ways. Mass bloodshed, very often the blood of the dictator or their theorists or their various followers. And so we seek to avoid that by incorporating the consent of the governed in an ongoing and renewable way that will keep people from feeling like their only recourse is the murder of their political opponents. But you, of course, are advocating that we just begin with that, and gosh, I just don't know if it's going to work. And I can account for one stupid, Dungeons and Dragons neckbeard weirdo. Not that Curtis Yarvin is a neckbeard weirdo. Not in this photo anyway. But I have a feeling like he might have spent some time that way. But maybe not. But J.D. Vance has adopted that look right now. Anyway, the point is one weirdo is always going to surface and say dumb things like this. The problem is that supposedly elite, educated, smart people are saying yes to this. And that's painful. All right. So where were we with this? Also P.S. centralized police power across the United States. Now, whether all this is plausible in the U.S. anytime soon, well, you'll have to ask the National Guard and the police officers. You have to be willing to say, okay, when we have this regime change, we have a period of temporary uncertainty, which has to be resolved in an extremely peaceful way, he says. Well, that doesn't work with militarizing the entire police power in the United States. And remember also, well, wouldn't they fall in line? Isn't the military right wing? Well, some of them are, but some of them are way not. And I don't mean just the rank and file either. Some among the brass, as it turns out, also see that this is a problem, i.e. some of the people in Trump's own administration. Although they aren't speaking out loudly enough in opposition to him now, they clearly do oppose the idea on principle. Rank and file, well, as it turns out, a lot of the military, not, typical profile for, let's say, ethno-nationalist Nazi takeover. A lot of people of color serving in the military, and those who aren't. Just a quick reminder, we're going to nationalize the National Guard. We're going to federalize the National Guard and take over. Oh yeah? Who's the command sergeant major or whatever it is in the Minnesota National Guard that you're going to federalize at the moment? Now, I don't know who it is now, but a couple of years ago, it was Tim Walz, and what do you think? What are the odds? How's it going to go? Are they going to listen to you? Mencius Moldbug somehow hasn't done any of the research into that. I don't know why, but I guess maybe he figures he can roll for initiative, and if he rolls a 20, boom, he's going to take over the National Guard. The point is something, and I'm your guest, and listen to me. All right. Yarvin also wants his new monarch's absolute power to be truly absolute, which can't really happen. so long as there are so many independently elected government power centers in especially blue states and cities. So they'll have to be abolished in almost, he quotes, quote unquote, almost all cases. This would surely be a towering logistical challenge and create a great deal of resistance, to put it mildly. So what else do they got to do in order to make things worse? Well, why not shut down elite media and academic institutions? There are some academic institutions maybe that we ought to be thinking about. Now, recall that according to Yarvin's theories, true power is held by the cathedral. So they've got to go too. This is great, right? How do we turn, it's almost alchemy. How do I turn lead into gold? Well, we go through a couple of chemical processes, and if they don't work, what we do is we kill everyone who says that this lead isn't gold, or force them to knuckle under to my declaration that this particular lead that I've put through this chemical process is gold. I force them to honor it and trade it as gold and pay for it as though it were gold. And that's it. And maybe there's an app. But if people don't agree and we can't force them to agree, well, okay, well, and sure, it's not going to work. But I mean, the point is, I'm talking about theory. Remember, I understand that these are long shots, but I think it can happen if we campaign on lead is gold and win 536 elections and take over all of the local and state and municipal apparatuses as well, and federalize the National Guard, and every person exercising police power on behalf of the state agrees that they will arrest, detain, kill anybody who doesn't honor our lead tokens as gold. Then we might not have succeeded necessarily in turning the lead into gold, but we will have made it worth as much as gold. Isn't that enough? No, it's not. It's not what you said. All right. So also along the way, shut down all of the cathedral. They've got to go too. The new monarch/dictator should order them dissolved. Now, they're trying it in Florida, piece by piece, right? You can't continue to have a Harvard or a New York Times past the start of April, he told Anton. So there you go. Again, roll for initiative. Maybe it'll work. I don't know. After that, he says, people should be allowed to form new associations and institutions if they want, but the existing cathedral power bases must be torn down. I guess there will be an app for how to tear them down. And when you open it, it will say, don't go to Harvard today. It's torn down. I can see it from my window. Well, no, you can't. Or we'll kill you if you go. There you go. All right. What does this even mean? Well, the next section, turn out your people. See, you got to win election as total dictator because of how dictatorships work. Finally, throughout this process, Yarvin wants to be able to get the new ruler's supporters to take to the streets. You don't have to vote. You just got to kill people. You don't really need an armed force. You need the maximum capacity to summon democratic power that you can find, he told Anton. This makes no sense. And Harvard and Yale trained people can't tell. This is astonishing. He pointed to the Trump app idea. Again, no, we should stay away from apps, which he said could collect 80 million cell numbers and notify people to tell them where to go and protest. Now, parentheses, quote, peacefully. That's what it says. For instance, they could go to an agency that's defying the new leader's instructions to tell them, support the lawful orders of this new lawful authority. Except it's not lawful. But again, I'll say this. There is a counter to all of this, and I have advocated for it from time to time, that if we're running things this way, right? I remind you that, for instance, of course, Heath does acknowledge he thinks FDR created a new regime and that there was an overthrow of the U.S. government and a replacement of the government with a new regime. But I remind you that if we're going to be doing things by mob rule, that, as I've said before, the objection, for instance, to taxation on the billionaires who fund this sort of nonsense and turn it into a supposedly respectable political philosophy that candidates for vice president should adhere to. I remind you that the marginal tax rate at the end of a pitchfork is 100%, and that you should take a 35% tax rate as a huge win, because the alternative is, you get run through with a pitchfork and your estate escheats to the federal government, let's say, or the state government, and there is no inheritance and people don't collect on the insurance and you're just finished. Your empire ends and the billions of dollars you said you have now belong to someone else, whether it's the guy with the pitchfork or the state. It's a bad deal. It's a raw deal. You don't want it. You suddenly prefer the rule of law, I think you will find. Anyway, but they're going to peacefully just tell people to support lawful orders of this new lawful authority as dictated by this mob here, which is, I guess, also supposedly lawful. It's all just a series of patches that this idiot comes up with to make things work, but it all comes down to violence against people who stand in the way, as would be their right to stand in the way. Oh, but it's all based on consent of the governed, you see, except if you consent to something other than what the mob says. He points to the post-Soviet revolutions in Eastern Europe as a model. There were no apps, there were no phone lists, but it's a model, saying the enormous mass of people shouldn't be menacing in this January 6th sense, except that our experience with it is that they are menacing in the January 6th sense. It should have this joyous sense. Ooh, joy, not a strategy unless you're Curtis Yarvin. Mencius Moldbug, the joyous sounding Mencius Moldbug. It should have this joyous sense that you're actually winning and winning forever, and the world is being completely remade. And he says that though many police officers follow orders during their day jobs, many of them also support Trump, so perhaps they could signal that by putting on a special armband. That's the ticket. Yeah, armbands are notoriously peaceful. If the institutions deny the president the constitutional position he has legally won in the election, the voters will have to act directly, Yarvin wrote. Trump will call his people into the streets, not at the end of his term when he is most powerless, at the start when he's most powerful. No one wants to see this nuclear option happen. Preparing for it and demonstrating the capacity to execute it will prevent it from having to happen. Okay. However, the only thing that's actually been executed and demonstrated is the January 6th type violence. That's the only way anybody has ever motivated Trump supporters into the streets before. I'm sure you'll have great success from top to bottom in encouraging them into the streets peacefully. Yes, that's how it will work. Next up, sowing seeds of doubt in democracy. Has anybody seen this begin to happen anywhere? Any elites adhering to this idea? Yarvin and I, this is Prokop, spoke for nearly 2.5 hours recently. He peppered his comments with hundreds of historical references, because that's what smart people do. And as he often does with left interlocutors, he focused on areas where he appeared to believe he could find common ground. He was at pains to reassure me that he didn't believe the U.S. regime was going to fall anytime soon, saying this was a generational, not immediate process. But J.D. Vance, 2 years in the Senate, should definitely implement this. Part of my project now is to say, let's make this a little less of an abstraction. Let's imagine what it might look like in a way that doesn't scare anyone, he said. It is dangerous. Any kind of serious political change is dangerous, and where we are is also dangerous, he said. So, 2 kinds of danger, they must be the same. He named specifically the possibility of nuclear war in Ukraine, which does seem quite dangerous, though it cannot be laid solely at the feet of democracy. And while saying he was not exactly a fan of FDR, he sang the praises of New Deal Washington as a time when the U.S. government could actually achieve impressive things, bemoaning that it no longer can. And by the way, there was plenty that it achieved and was rolled back. over the years, and some of it, of course, rolled back immediately because rule of law, even if it wasn't a particularly good ruling for law. But there was pressure back, the court packing threats, etc. But all of it was tempered in some way by the existing structure of democracy. But now we'll have an app, so we don't have to worry about that, apparently. All this is more politic than Mencius Moldbug's old approach of throwing rhetorical bombs at the left. And he's given an explanation of this shift. On his Substack, he has used a, you'll never believe it, Lord of the Rings metaphor in which red staters are hobbits battling the elite blue stater elves, but with dark elf allies. Elite blue staters like him. So they're among the elves because they're elite in blue states, but they're dark elves, meaning that they're somehow helping the poor hobbits in red states. I don't think there really would be. Is there a Tolkien parallel for, well, one, I guess there is the existence of dark elves, but wouldn't they be the ones less likely to help the hobbits? Who knows? Anyway, the first job of dark elves is to explain why anyone should listen to them. But the first job of dark elves is to seduce the high elves, to sow acorns of dark doubt in their high golden minds, he wrote. You would never say this out loud. Of course it's written. Then perhaps they'll change sides, or maybe an app will make them change sides. Or at least their conviction and energy may flag. Today's global elites are invulnerable to any external coercive power, and can coerce any internal coercive power, he continued. Sure. Like the USSR, they can only overthrow themselves. It's nonsense. That is, he wants to convince elite liberals and leftists to lose faith in the system, but from the right, I guess, believing that when enough of them no longer want to defend it, it will be easier to topple. In his thinking, that's the prerequisite for regime change. When you see cultural elites developing a sense of possibility in a broader sense, which is outside of the sort of matrix of conventional belief, then you're like, okay, something interesting is starting to happen, he told me. Sure. Here's my plan. I think you should convince elites to give me either all their money or a free jet and maybe like free pizza for life. I don't know why it makes any sense, but supposing you had an app that could convince these people to do it, then you would see real change. I'd have more pizza and I'd probably take longer vacations. But you know, as defining that as real change, but just, not anybody else would, but suppose you could elect a Congress that entirely believed that that was good change. Well, then it would be likely to happen, you see. Anyway, among liberals and the left, there is indeed much frustration that our government and political system have become sclerotic and ineffective, that the Constitution is fatally flawed, that America can't build anymore, and that the president is frustratingly weak. Ideas to empower the majority party, expand executive power, and take the Supreme Court down a peg are now commonly debated among Democrats. I mean, some of that is true. They share with many on the right the feeling of being locked in never-ending political combat with a terrifying, powerful other side that enjoys unfair advantages in the system, while their own leaders aren't doing enough to fight back. That part is recognizable. But an app to change the minds of everyone in Congress? But of course, Yarvin's villains, the media, academia, the deep state, are different from the villains in the progressive story: moneyed interests, bigotry or systemic bias, religious extremists, ignorant red staters, right? I did see somebody put it more succinctly the other day on Blue Sky, saying, the outrage of the left and the right are totally different. Like the result of outrage on the right is insurrection, January 6th, dictatorship. The result of outrage on the left is we should have 2-day weekends and labor movement should regulate things, and let's move to a 40-hour work week and give people time off. That's one way of putting it. Anyway, what he'd want his monarch to do with all that power is different too. He's written about his idea to deter crime. What is it? Put an ankle monitor on anyone who's not rich or employed. And create relocation centers for decivilized subpopulations. What do we think Mencius Moldbug means by that? So, if you're trying to increase left-right agreement that the current system is fatally flawed, I asked him, is it really possible to please both sides about what the new system will offer? Might you be trying to sell the left a bill of goods, claiming this future monarchy will be better when it will actually be far worse for them? Well, neither side should be sold a bill of goods, he answered. This is not a homogeneous country. It's never been. There's a lot of people in this country who have to share the same land. That's a solvable problem. Get a nap. He referenced the long-running conflict between plebeians and patricians in the Roman Republic, which he said was made irrelevant by Julius Caesar and his successor, Augustus's centralization of power. You see, everything got great, and then the Roman Empire stayed forever. Imagine in America if this red state, blue state, race war, class war, all this stuff, we'll say, it's just gone. He said, well, yeah, imagine that. Just imagine it. The picture was so rosy that the music of John Lennon began playing in my head. It is certainly possible to imagine a much more effective government under one-man rule than the one man, or the one we have now. Not the one man, but the system we have. Perhaps if we picked out the perfect, brilliant, ingenious, compassionate king with a wise board of directors that he'd respect rather than supplant, it would all work out well. It could also, of course, work out very poorly. By the way, who do you think Mencius Moldbug might suggest for the job? Even if the darkest scenarios don't come about, sclerosis and decay are hardly problems unique to the democratic systems. They've affected autocracies throughout history, up to today. It is difficult to ensure the leader's incentives are focused on good governance rather than on entrenching himself in power. The corporate model, which Yarvin praises, also often leads to dysfunctional bureaucracy, not to mention that governing a country might simply be a different sort of problem than running a company. But in a practical sense, Yarvin's long-term ambitions for the new regime matter less than his ideas about how the old one could fall. Yarvin's popularity among rising Republicans and new right intellectuals reveals his cohort is more and more willing to entertain ideas that are out of the mainstream, i.e. weird, crazy even. Some ambitious figure, or even Trump himself, could well try to follow his playbook in a future crisis, or write a new playbook and then disavow it if it gets controversial. If they do, despite Yarvin's urging that the revolution should be, quote, absolutely bloodless. And remember, didn't we just hear from the Project 2025 guy not that long ago? It will be bloodless if the left allows it, right? It will be absolutely bloodless. Just knuckle under. We don't have to kill you. We will, but we don't have to. There's no telling how messy things could get, despite Yarvin's urging. All the declarations that America is currently falling apart could look quaint by comparison to what comes if the rule of law is shredded and the current order is toppled. If you yank out a tooth, you cannot automatically expect a new and better tooth to grow back, the economist Tyler Cowen recently wrote in a critique of the New Right. The best laid plans of revolutionaries very often go awry. When I first asked to speak with Yarvin, he requested that I prove my, quote, professional seriousness as a current historian, unquote, yawn, by, quote, reading or at least skimming all three books. I guess he wanted to name them. Well, and I complied. One of them, Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann, a classic of the journalism school canon, describes how people can respond when their previous beliefs about how the world works are called into question. Sometimes, if the incident is striking enough, and if he has felt a general discomfort with his established scheme, he may be shaken to such an extent as to distrust all accepted ways of looking at life. Maybe. Or he may not be, by the way. And to expect that normally a thing will not be what it is generally supposed to be. Take that! People who don't believe an app can do all this. That's Lippmann writing. In the extreme case, especially if he is literary, he may develop a passion for inverting the moral canon by making Judas, Benedict Arnold, or Caesar Borgia the hero of his tale. Maybe. but also maybe not. There, I thought of Yarvin, the self-described dark elf who yearns for a king. And we've made it to the end, and we've dominated the show, of course, with more garbage from Curtis Yarvin. I just wanted you to know, like, where the weird comes from, who's been inspiring it, and how weak the premise of all of it really is, and yet our elite minds, whom we should elect because they graduated from Yale or Harvard or Stanford or what have you, well, no. And I mean, think about how many of these people who are just terrible and who really have no grasp of how this whole thing is supposed to work are graduating with these degrees nonetheless. I mean, they don't all have to come out the same, cut from the same cloth, or robots or liberals even. But J.D. Vance, Blake Masters, and, oh my gosh, everybody else. I mean, and Tom Cotton, who was on the shows the other day, making no sense whatsoever. Not that he ever does, but all of these guys cling to their having graduated from these elite universities while railing against the elites, of course. And this is the result. You get this kind of garbage. All right. I wanted to get that on the record. This brings us back to the ability to continue with actual, like, daily news coverage, perhaps, over the rest of the week. There's a lot to get to, and a lot that I should have put on record and let you know that you should be looking out for, including the fact that there's now more action down in Judge Cannon's courtroom, as Chris Geidner has been covering. Jack Smith has been back before Aileen Cannon, asking for an appeal of her dismissal of some of the charges in the Mar-a-Lago phase of the cases that Smith is bringing against, Donald Trump, the guy who's running for president. So we should catch up on that. We should catch up on what's happening in courtrooms around the country while the campaign is going on. There's plenty to do. And hey, if you can't wait, Justice Putnam may be able to update you just today, as a matter of fact. Let's go and take a peek at what he's got on tap for today. Jack Smith, covered right up top. Smith formally filed the brief for Trump's espionage case with the 11th Circuit, an appeal of Cannon's dismissal of it, too. We've got more. Hold on.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
This absolutely deserves priority. A news out of Texas that we haven't been able to speak about yet. An 87-year-old Texas Latina who complained about local seniors not being sent their mail-in ballots has had her house raided for daring to complain by officers of Ken Paxton's Election Integrity Unit. Stay tuned.